Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. The University of Arizona's debate team strives to provide engaging and accessible ways for students and the local community to learn about current events and philosophical discussion. This evening, we are hosting the presidential debate thanks to all the hard work of each member on the team and the guidance of our beloved coach, Ted McCloof. Here's how the debates will work this evening. There will be 4 resolutions on the subjects of healthcare, environment, foreign policy, and economics. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond yes or no to these resolutions, and 1 minute to respond to our moderators with follow-up questions. The candidates will respond in a random order as selected from this pile of cards. You as the audience get to choose who the winner is, so stick around to cast your vote and find out the winner as well as the winner for the raffle. Additionally, there is going to be a gun rights debate on the 24th, and we hope to see you all there, as well as please take the opportunity to register to vote with Griffin outside in the purple sweater. This is going to be an important upcoming election, clearly. And without further ado, let's announce the presidential candidates for the presidential debate of 2020. Finley Dutton Reed as Pete Buttigieg. RJ Lynch as Donald Trump. Daniel Joffrey as Joe Biden. Joshua Tashoff as Bernie Sanders. Akash Satpathy as Andrew Yang. And last but not least, Miss Kayla Steele as Elizabeth Warren. Enjoy.
You can. Yeah. Good. Thank you very much, everyone. So the 3 of us will be your moderators for the evening. I'm Ted McCloof.
I'm Ashley Freedy.
And I'm Emma Encinas.
So, as Erin said, we're going to allow each of our candidates 1 minute to respond yes or no and explain why it is that they're saying yes or no to each of 4 resolutions on foreign policy, healthcare, the environment, and economics. They'll also have 1 minute to respond to one of our follow-up questions afterwards. They will not be addressing each other because we want to try to avoid the hectic nature of what we usually see in the debates on CNN. And we want to get this to be as civil and as informative as possible. So please make sure that we keep it civil, candidates. And we're going to ask yes or no to this very first resolution, which is on foreign policy. Freedy?
The United States should reduce its nuclear arsenal and cease its investment in the modernization of the weapons.
Emma, would you like to pull the first card?
Yes. Okay, so we're going to start with Donald Trump.
So, am I good to go?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So for Donald Trump, we would say no. We're on the side of no because the United States should not reduce its arsenal because we are the global police on this world stage. And if you sit here and you take away our own nuclear weapons, it's only going to destabilize the world because you have countries like North Korea, Iran, and Russia, 3 of our biggest enemies in this world, and all 3 of them have nuclear arms. And all 3 of them would push that button at a single moment to send that nuclear arms over to us and to really affect our country. So the only way that we as a nation can stand up to those countries that do have those arsenals would be to have them ourselves. The best way to deter people from using a weapon is if you have the same capability, if not more powerful, to use it against them. Now, we don't want to use it. It was a tragedy when it was used during World War II. We never want them to be used again. But we would like to be able to have that power to make sure that no one can fear that the United States is not able to defend either themselves or the rest of the world and all of our allies.
Thank you very much for keeping the time. Our next candidate will be Andrew Yang.
So Ronald Reagan, I think, once said that a nuclear war can never be won, it can only be fought. So we all very well know the danger that nuclear weapons pose to American citizens and to the entire world. So I would make sure that we invest heavily in counter-proliferation efforts by identifying sources of nuclear stockpile and buying them at exorbitant prices. Number two, I would fully support the no first-use policy. It sends a clear message that we're not interested in war, rather we're interested in peacekeeping. And most importantly, something that nobody is focusing on, it is that I'll make sure that the VP and Chief of Staff are in the chain of command for nuclear decisions, because one person should not have the power to launch nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yang, and thank you for properly pronouncing the word nuclear. Yes, candidates, could you please make sure that you have the signs that say yes or no and keep them up during the round? Thank you very much. Free? Yeah.
Bernie Sanders.
So I think the obvious answer is yes. And I think any sane person, if they ask themselves this question, would they reduce nuclear arsenals or would they fire a nuclear weapon to begin with? The obvious answer would be no, because nuclear weapons are designed to kill hundreds of thousands of people in a second, and any moral person, any person with a shred of dignity and decency would refuse such a choice. I know I certainly would, and I think it's insane that any government has the power to do that as it stands. But what this is really asking, and RJ brought this up, and I'm really glad we get to talk about it, is the way that the United States uses its military power. We all know that the United States is the strongest country in the world, and Iran and North Korea and China, they all know it too. Okay, we don't have to continue to be the world's police. We've seen the disastrous effects time and time and time again when the United States tries to use military force as a bludgeon in place of actual peace negotiation. We see the disasters over and over again in the Middle East. We see more and more of that conflict being spread out into the rest of the world. As president, I would take immediate steps to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. You want to hold the next one?
Yes. Oh, wait. Vice President Joe Biden.
I am going to be citing yes on this resolution. I do believe that it is our responsibility to begin to reduce our stockpile of nuclear weapons. And while it is important that we properly maintain what remains, we should not continue to modernize what we have. It cannot be overstated how dangerous, how devastating even a single nuclear weapon can be. And it is unfortunate that at the moment our only real deterrent is the threat of retaliation. However, at this moment, with America's arms, with our force, with what we can bring without needing to resort to nuclear weapons, it doesn't make strategic sense to keep adding to this. There's been a proposition to increase low-yield bombs. This is not needed. It is dangerous. It is a threat to the stability of our nation and to the world's balance. And for this reason, it is our responsibility to begin to bring down this yield. Slowly, yes. Cautiously, yes. Again, it is a deterrent to keep this from happening to us. So we need to work in concert with other nations. But it needs to happen. Thank you.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you. I think that the true strength of our military is never having to use it. And nowhere is this truer than with nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are needed for deterrence, and they are needed to keep us safe. But they are inherently dangerous. Even a small accident could lead to massive loss of life. So having them around for no reason makes no sense. According to a report from the Pentagon in 2013, the US's nuclear arsenal is 33% larger than it needs to be to respond in kind to any attack, which means that we have an excess of around 500 nuclear warheads for no reason. So keeping these inherently dangerous devices around for no reason makes no sense, which is why I have yes.
And finally, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
So I affirm the resolution. All three of my brothers have served in the military, and I have seen firsthand how incredibly intelligent, tough, and resourceful they are. We don't need nuclear deterrence because of our soldiers. War is hard on families, abusive to the middle class, and ultimately, I believe that it's time that we refinance America's nuclear spending. We need to reinvest in diplomatic and nonviolent and non-confrontational engagement abroad in order to create international unity that will ultimately lead to peaceful resolutions that even further reduce the need for nuclear arsenals. It's time to identify which programs actually benefit American security in the 21st century. Cut unnecessary expenditures and cease funding to programs that do not contribute to the general well-being of anyone beyond the defense contractor and the corporation. In the 21st century, democracy is waning, and as a country, we need to be strong and secure at home in order to maintain democratic standards, dispel nationalism, avoid corruption, and it's time to have foreign policy that works for all Americans.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Now we'll ask each of the candidates a follow-up question based on your answer, and please try to keep your answers to 1 minute. And we'll begin with Emma.
Okay, so my question is going to be for Senator Sanders. You said that you did not think that the government should be in charge of, I believe, this kind of issue of modernizing weapons and reducing the nuclear arsenal. So who do you think should be in charge of that?
Let me clarify. It is unfortunate, I think, that any government, any entity, any person has any control over nuclear weapons to begin with. In an ideal world, we shouldn't have nuclear weapons at all. Obviously, if a resolution like this is going to be put into place, and I'm proud to stand with multiple people on this stage and say that we are committed to a no first strike policy, we are committed to reducing the amount of nuclear weapons we have, obviously the government would do that. The executive branch would take that action. But the ultimate goal is not to simply reduce the amount of nuclear weapons. I say the ultimate goal of any peace-oriented foreign policy would be to eliminate nuclear weapons entirely. And I think that's something we should all strive to consider when we talk about foreign policy, not in this sense that, we should only be focusing on incremental steps towards less and less weaponry, but in fact, a complete elimination of the most dangerous tools humanity has ever produced.
I have a question for President Donald Trump. In your statement, you talked about how the U.S. is the policing force of the world. So I'd like to ask you why you think the U.S. should be in that position.
So I don't actually firmly believe that the United States should be in that position. I feel like that's a position that we got put into after World War II and what went on. So I feel like the United States should not have to be the world police. It is very sad that Warren's family has had to deal with war and that we've been in so many different types of wars. So the United States should not be the police of the world, but it's just a sad reality that we are the police of the world. And there's places that they ask us, like the EU, they ask us to help them. We don't sit here and say, hey, we want to help you. Hey, we're going to help you. They come to us and ask for that help. And that's the reason why you have a country like Japan that is right near North Korea. And South Korea as well. They want us to have those powers to help them and to deter something happening to them, not just something happening to us. We don't want to be the police of the world, but we have to keep this world a safe place for everyone as much as possible. Thank you.
I'm going to use both of mine at the same time and ask about the difference between right now Mayor Buttigieg and Vice President Biden's answers. Vice President Biden, you seem to be suggesting that the most important reason for reducing our nuclear arsenal has to do with protection of the U.S. and sort of putting American interests first. And Mayor Buttigieg, you seem to be sort of making a more general argument for the safety of the world as a whole. So if I could ask why it is that your priorities sort of seem to be slightly differing there in terms of a sort of America first kind of policy versus a sort of like a more global kind of policy.
I'm not sure that our perspectives are differing on this. Obviously, any nuclear conflict would be a global problem, but when I was referring to accidents, this could also happen in the US. There have been multiple cases where we've had close calls with mismanaged nuclear weapons here at home. And so we need to reduce the arsenal because even having these around allows for the possibility of mistakes. And if we don't need them, as the Pentagon says, why have that risk there in the first place? I'd also like to point out that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. That's factually incorrect.
Addressing your question, Mr. McLoof, I do believe that Mayor Buttigieg and I, our positions reflect more or less the same two sides of the same coin. Whether your focus is on potential accidents or simply being a deterrent, the fact is that the existence, the mass existence of nuclear weapons on a global stage is dangerous. We've seen the only time they've been used in war, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the devastation, the years that it took to clean up. As he said, we've had close calls in this past few decades. This is a threat that is not necessary. Our military alone can support any scale war that we choose to put it through. We don't want there to be war, but we don't need nuclear weapons to win it. And while having them at the moment is necessary as a deterrent, we need to move away. If they're not necessary to win, and they're so dangerous to have, both in our hands as accidents happened and in the hands of our enemies, we should begin to phase them out, as Senator Sanders has said. They're dangerous, very dangerous.
And you can refer to me as King McLoof if you'd like.
Okay, so our next question is going to be directed at, I guess, are we going with just Yang? Mr. Yang, okay. So you spoke about kind of that you want to look at this, ideally we'd go with peacekeeping over war, right? And so I was just wondering kind of if you could expound upon this point of what peacekeeping looks like within the context of this resolution. Like, how do we achieve that?
Sure. So unfortunately, we are stuck with nuclear weapons for the next couple of decades at least, because nuclear weapons, they take time to decompose, or if you want to make them unusable. And that's why I mentioned that we need more people in the chain of command. I think just imagine the power one person has. Like I think I was talking to someone in the military, and they were saying, and I asked them, what's the fail-safe? What happens if the president presses the red button? Can you undo that? And they said there's absolutely no way to do it. So, and that should be concerning. One person should never have such a huge amount of power. And that's why I was mentioning no first use policy, that is never using nuclear weapon first, is just step number one. Step number two is to ensure that you have more people such as the vice president and the chief of staff, so that you can make a good decision if you have to. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, Senator Warren. In your speech, you mentioned some policies you'd like to put in place, and one of them was cutting funding for programs that benefit only the contractors and the Defense Department. Couldn't one argue that it benefits the economy in another way or not?
Great question. So I get what kind of you're saying, that it might invigorate the economy, but at what cost? To have these kinds of nuclear weapons, to have them be available, rather than taking that money and putting it and reinvesting it in something that's a more comprehensive and a better solution. So rather than having money go to these defense contractors who make money solely off of war, rather we're taking that money and we're reinvesting it into actual diplomatic solutions, building those connections with nations, and being able to kind of have these comprehensive ways of going about things that don't need to have a violent result.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Now let's move on to our second resolution of the evening. And our second resolution will be on the topic of economics, and the resolution will be tax cuts benefit purely the companies they are given to. Again, the economic resolution for the evening is tax cuts benefit purely the companies that they're given to. And our first speaker will be, appropriately enough, Mr. Andrew Yang.
Oh, nice. So 78% of Americans today are living paycheck to paycheck. 40% cannot deal with an extra $400 bill. And companies like Amazon, trillion-dollar tech companies, pay absolutely nothing in taxes. So the logical solution might seem, as Sanders or Elizabeth Warren might say, is to impose a wealth tax. But we have seen in countries like France, Germany, Sweden, and Denmark, when they imposed a wealth tax, they ended up repealing it. It didn't make as much revenue as they wanted, not to forget that it had major compliance and implementation problems. So the solution is to impose a value-added tax, which more than 100 major economies have imposed. A 10% value-added tax would create more than $900 billion per year. And then this value-added tax could be used to fund my flagship plan called the Freedom Dividend, which is giving every American $1,000 a month. So by putting money back into the hands of the American people and giving everyone a tiny slice of profits made by these massive companies, we will empower the American people, get rid of income inequality, and successfully create a trickle-up economy.
Thank you, Mr. Yang.
Next up, we have Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
This claim is too extreme. I have to disagree. The entire economy is connected, and the US needs its engines of growth. But this growth needs to be shared by all Americans. The bottom half of income earners in the US haven't had a real raise in 40 years. And this is a serious problem. And that's why I support a capital gains tax for the top 1%. The wealthy and the powerful, they have to pay their share. This capital gains tax would raise $2.1 trillion. I'm also in favor of making the banks pay for the financial crisis that they caused in 2008 and 2009. And I want to remind everyone that don't be fooled by Bernie's hair. I'm the poorest person on this stage, and my policies reflect that.
Okay, so next we're going to have Vice President Joe Biden.
In a surprising move for me, I feel constrained by the way the question is worded, and I must say no. No, we are not purely benefiting the corporations. There are times when you invest in a corporation, when they are given tax cuts, when the wealthy are allowed to keep more of their money, that they do put it back into the corporation. They put it back into wages. They put it back into capital, into training. This happens, but it doesn't happen enough. I say no because I'm constrained by the question, but my goal is and has always been the benefit of the middle class. More often than not, you see a corporation investing its money back into itself, into its shareholders, not the people that support it. But America relies on its middle class. It's been oversaid again and again, but it's true that they are our backbone. And these tax cuts just don't do enough for them. It doesn't purely support the corporations, but my main proponent, my support for the economic policy has been to increase taxes on the 1%. Increase taxes on those corporations and individuals making more than $1 million a year. Because while this doesn't only help the wealthy, it just doesn't do enough to help the core of America. Thank you.
And next we're going to go to Senator Elizabeth Warren.
All right, so I affirm the resolution, and Basically, I really want to see corporate tax cuts get rolled back. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was one of the most controversial bills passed by the Trump administration, and I have joined the chorus of opponents of the bill because it's basically just a giveaway to corporations. These tax cuts are a broken promise to the middle class. And if you know me, you know I have a plan for everything. So my green manufacturing plan would be paid for with real corporate profits tax that would prevent corporations from abusing the loopholes that they already take advantage of. My excessive lobbying tax aims to deter corporations and trade organizations from influencing the government through high spending. The money raised from these taxes would then be put back into the Lobbying Defense Trust Fund, dedicated to strengthening our government against the influences of lobbyists. If I were to win this presidency, a core part of my agenda would be rolling back Trump's tax cut legislation. I, as a candidate who believes in the American people, am pledging to overhaul the economic and political system to favor workers more instead of wealthy Americans and corporations. Thank you.
Next, we'll be hearing from Senator Bernie Sanders.
So I really appreciate that the focus of most of my colleagues has been on income inequality and not just the idea of tax cuts. But nothing has really been asked as to why there is so much income inequality. You know, why do 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck? Why do most of them cannot afford an unexpected $500 cost? It's not something that just happened. This has been a targeted effort since around the 70s to completely eviscerate the working class of this country. It's framed in the language of tax cuts, that when we create more tax cuts, the wealthy are going to have their money trickle down to the rest of us. That has proven 100% false. What we are proposing to do, more than anyone on this stage, is overhaul the United States economy so that rather for working for the top 1%, it works for you and me, it works for us. Because we have a fundamentally broken system. Tax cuts are just the tip of the iceberg. When you have the 1% billionaires controlling pretty much every facet of the system that's designed to regulate them, of course you're going to see an extremely flawed system. Of course you're going to see the type of inequality that they talk about. I'm the only candidate that addresses the how and the why, and that's why we should all be standing with Bernie Sanders to address the fundamental problem of our age.
And President Donald Trump?
So for me, it's going to be a no, of course, because this tax plan, this question is a direct attack on myself and the economy. And I would like to state by this fact of those who work a full-time job, I would like you to ask yourselves a simple question today. Is your life today harder financially today than it was 4 years ago before the tax plan was implemented? Because as my record has showed, this tax plan, once this tax plan has been implemented, we have the lowest unemployment rate in all sectors of our government, no matter race, gender, or anything. It is the lowest unemployment rate we've ever had. And on top of it, well, tax plan was a supply side economics. For those who don't understand, what that means is the money then goes to the companies, but the companies then reinvest it, which they have, such as Apple, Comcast, and AT&T. They have all reinvested their money, raised the wages that their employees were gaining, gave them stocks in their company, and gave them extra monthly bonuses that they were not getting before. This is stuff that this tax plan does, and all of the other tax plans that have been talked about, they are something that you just have to hope that the people do right by the money. Thank you.
Mr. Yang, you discussed a little bit about trickle-up economics. So can you go a little more into depth on that and explain it to the audience?
Thank you. Absolutely. So the idea of giving everybody $1,000 a month might seem like an insane idea, but it's a really American idea. Thomas Paine was for this 250 years ago. More recently, MLK proposed that we should have a universal basic income. And the basic idea is to have a foundation on which people can rely on. So the problems I was mentioning, like an unexpected paycheck or living paycheck to paycheck, things like that, it's gonna take all that stress out. It's gonna be something that people can fall back on. I would like to address some of the problems or some of the solutions being presented by the other side. Mr. Sanders I appreciate the enthusiasm, but you're presenting 20th century problems, 20th century solutions to 21st century problems. No one is talking about AI. Amazon, for example, is sucking up 30% of the sales. They're closing 30% of stores in the US, and those jobs are not going to be replaced. And universal basic income is just one of the ways we can deal with these problems. Thank you.
President Trump, you said that the economy and specifically the middle working class is looking at the best tax income rates that they've seen in the past. I couldn't quote you on exactly how many years, but that they're looking at very profitable rates. What do you base that on?
I base that on the statistic that for a working family, if they were getting $1,500 back in taxes before my tax plan, they are now raised by almost $1,000, if not more. Also, you are able to claim your children to a higher profitability. Before, if you had more than 3 children, you cannot continue to claim. Luckily now, under my tax plan, you are able to continue to claim. So if you're a family of 8, you're not stuck at just claiming the first 2 children. You are getting the money back for all 8 of those children, or 6 of those children, and no matter how many children you have. So it's stuff like that, as well as the tax break. It reduced not just the corporate tax rate, but also the tax rate on individuals and their own income. People who are working full-time now, they're seeing less government taxes being taken out of their check than they were prior to me implementing my tax plan. Thank you.
Senator Sanders, your eyes were rolling in the back of your head during most of President Trump's response. So if you'd like to respond, that's my question.
Absolutely. So, of course, we can say that there's been marginal economic growth, but what does economic growth actually mean for all of us? Does it mean a rise in real wages? No. Does it mean that rent becomes cheaper, that the cost of fundamental essentials like healthcare becomes cheaper? No. So perhaps there might be a slight increase in the amount of tax returns you're getting, but at the end of the day, the fundamental costs of living, the things that sink most of our paychecks, are ultimately increasing and not being solved for at all. So we can talk about economic growth all we want, but at the end of the day, the only people that really benefit from economic growth are those who invest in corporations. And I don't know about you, but me as a student, an average person in the United States economy, I'm not investing in any corporations. Nobody I know, aside from a few people in the debate club, have really any interest in corporations. The only people that have a stake, such a big stake, to see those numbers increase are those at the very top. While those at the bottom continue to be left with nothing. What we are proposing is a fundamental reordering of values, caring instead of the numbers at the very top, of the actual lives and values of those at the bottom, those that make up the strong majority of this country. Thank you.
Senator Sanders, I'd like to know where you're a student.
I have a question for Vice President Biden. You discussed a little bit about increasing the taxes on 1%, and you see a lot of Democratic candidates vouching for the same. Can you explain a little bit why it's the 1%?
Now, I might have said 1% because, again, that figure has been put in all of our heads by a very, very prominent voice that I will not name for reasons of politeness. What I was alluding to when I said that, we used to have a tax on individuals or entities making more than $1 million a year at 39.6%. In recent years, that number has dropped to 20%. My proposition is that we bring that back up. That money can be used to fund things that affect all of society: Social Security, Medicare, issues that affect the middle class. This dropping of tax doesn't fund these programs. It's not building, it's not enforcing the middle class. That is what my platform is built upon. When I say that I want this tax on people making more than just the share of others to raise, it's for the benefit of our country as a whole. When you help the backbone, when you straighten the spine, you help the health of the entire individual. And that's what I'm aiming to do.
Mayor Pete, my question is for you. You were speaking about how the bank should pay back kind of like what they lost during the financial crisis. What does that look like for you? Because to me, it sounds a bit like an economic reparation or something like that. So I kind of was wondering like more detail.
I think that it can be phrased as such, but it is undeniable that the financial institutions of this country abused the American people when they put bets on subprime loan mortgages with the knowledge that they would fail. They knew that they were going to fail. And they counted on us, the American people, to bail them out. And we needed to. We had to bail them out because if we didn't, our entire economy would go down the tubes. So we did. So in essence, they held us hostage. They held our homes hostage, our jobs hostage for their profit. And I don't think that they have adequately repaid us and the debt that they owe us for holding us hostage. I'd also like to point out on the comments made by Mr. Trump that correlation does not equal causality, and that I'm talking and Bernie is talking about the past 40 years, not the last 4. The unemployment rate may be down, but this doesn't account for the fact that people are working part-time. They're working many jobs, or they may have just dropped out of the labor market entirely. And finally, when the stock market goes up, the top 1% owns half the stock market. So of course they're going to do very, very well, but the average American doesn't own stocks.
Finally, Senator Warren, of the candidates who are running the primaries right now, we've seen your economic policy is often equated with Senator Sanders, but we've also seen a sort of rift between those two. So if you could make a distinction, if there is one, between how it is that you sort of view the economy and how it is that Senator Sanders views the economy, and whether socialist is an appropriate term to describe what those policies mean, that would be great.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would kind of want to start saying that like we do have very, very similar viewpoints. I would consider both of us to be very progressive in our viewpoints. The difference is that I have a lot of very concrete plans, especially to get money out of politics. As I kind of was talking about it, there are all these lobbying groups, and as you can see, a lot of the candidates up on this stage right now are funded by billion-dollar corporations, by multi-millionaires. They're backed by all of these huge people, and it's one of the issues is that when we have candidates and people on stage, unlike Senator Sanders and I, who are being backed by billions of dollars, they're going to be incentivized to say that, oh, we're not gonna have like all these huge taxes on like the people. We'll have taxes on the wealthy, but they won't do that because they're backed by these people. And I think that that's kind of, I would say that probably Senator Sanders is on the same side as me, but I have concrete plans to get money out of politics, to help the American people and to make sure that we aren't having all of these corporations play on our political systems, because that's unfair to the American people. And just to comment once more on kind of what Donald Trump said, for his inaccuracy, his 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, rather than allowing those corporations to put money back into their businesses, they instead bought back their stock and laid off workers. So it didn't really help anyone out but themselves.
Thank you. Let's move on to our third resolution of the evening. Our third resolution on the topic of healthcare. We want to concentrate on how much the role of the government actually is necessary in healthcare by asking, resolved, the U.S. should be committed to providing its citizens both quantity and quality of life. Again, the U.S. should be committed to providing its citizens both quantity and quality of life. How much does the government have a responsibility to do that? And we will begin with Senator Elizabeth Warren.
All right, so I affirm this resolution. Healthcare is a basic, fundamental human right, and we fight for those basic human rights. I won't stop fighting until everyone in this country is covered and no one goes broke paying off a medical bill or filling out a prescription. I promise not one penny in middle-class tax increases. And to allow this plan to come to fruition, I support Medicare for All, which would provide all Americans with the public health with a public health care program. Medicare for All is the best way to give every person in this country a guarantee of high quality health care. Everybody is covered, no one goes broke because of medical expenses, and there's no more fighting with these insurance companies. The basic business model of an insurance company is to take in as much money as it can in premiums and paying out as little as possible in healthcare coverage. That leaves families with rising premiums, high deductibles, and fighting with their insurance companies to try to get the healthcare that their doctors say that they need. Insurers protect their bottom lines, restrict your networks of providers, and they stand in the way when you want to go see your doctor. Everyone can see their doctor under Medicare for All. Nobody goes broke, and your doctor gets paid by Medicare instead of by an insurance company. Thank you.
I can't say his name.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Everyone agrees with the sentiment of this resolution, but we have to descend into the particular, and to solve this dilemma, we have to dream without floating into fantasy. This is why I have proposed Medicare for all who want it, a realistic stepping stone and a public option that has been successful in European nations like France. But frankly, I think we're missing the point with this whole discussion. We have to be asking the fundamental question, why are Americans more sick than other developed nations? Why do we have higher chronic illness rates? Why do we have higher infant mortality? And to solve these questions, we have to talk about the social determinants of health. Where are people working? How are they working? Where are they living? And how can we make these circumstances better so they don't get sick in the first place? Because upstreaming these problems is not only better for people's health, but it's also more cost effective. And this is why we need to talk about this issue on this topic.
Okay, next we are going to go to Senator Sanders.
Awesome. So I think Medicare for all, everybody pretty much understands it, right? The government is going to provide health care to every person, or health insurance coverage to every person. Doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter your gender, doesn't matter your age. Every single person is going to be guaranteed health care. And I personally think, and the millions behind our movement agree, including Ms. Warren, hopefully, that the role of a government is to ensure that its citizens do have the highest quality, highest standard of life imaginable, especially in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. But somehow that doesn't happen. The reason it doesn't happen is because we have an insurance system, we have a healthcare system that is dominated by special interests. And I'm sorry, Mr. Buttigieg, and I'm sorry, Mr. Biden, you can't adequately tackle those issues. You can't adequately tackle those special interests by taking millions and millions of dollars in campaign contributions from them. We're proud to be 100% donor funded, which means people like you and people like me fund the entirety of the Bernie Sanders campaign. That's not true for the other frontrunners on the stage who proudly collect money from billionaires, especially billionaires from the health insurance industry. So if you truly want to tackle the single greatest issue that voters are facing right now, paying for healthcare, you should go with the candidate who, one, has consistency on the issue, and two, isn't funded by the special interests they're trying to fight against.
Feel the burn indeed. President Donald Trump.
All right. So I'm a no on this resolution. I would first like to start by talking about this Medicare for all. When she says that, when Warren says that it's not going to tax the middle class, it is a stated fact, a known fact, that if we taxed every 1% in every country across the world, we would still not have enough money to fund Medicare for all of 4 years. So if they believe that they're not going to have to raise the taxes on other people like middle class and lower class people to afford these types of Medicare for all, it's impossible, and it is thinking in the clouds, like Buttigieg said earlier. And I would like to also bring up the fact that we should privatize healthcare. healthcare. The United States should be focusing on giving great quality, but not quantity. Quantity is all based on market value. And if you privatize your healthcare system like we have here, that's when you have companies that are competing to be the lowest cost, to be the best for the people. And once again, when it comes to the chronic illnesses and stuff, that's because people don't go to the doctors. People are more happy to go to McDonald's and eat like pigs than they are to actually go out and go to the doctors. But instead of finding somewhere that is low and where they can go for a low amount of money, they sit here and they actually would rather have us pay for it. And for those who know it, I think of JFK the most when I think of healthcare. I think of ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, and how it is those who are unable to help themselves. Those are the ones we most should be taking care of when it comes to our healthcare system, not the people who can contribute to the rest of the country.
I'm gonna need healthcare for my bloody knuckles from banging the table.
Mr. Yang.
Yes. I'm just going to keep that. So did you see what happened here? All the Democrats fighting and telling you how much they really care about universal healthcare. I think this is the wrong argument to be having now. Like, we should be we should be laser focused on the actual problems, the actual reasons why US citizens do not have healthcare. For example, prescription drugs, the prices for that have risen 76% in the last 6 years. Or the fact that 77% of small towns do not even have access to proper healthcare. So simply just expanding it doesn't mean that everybody's getting proper healthcare. So how do we give citizens both quantity and quality of life is by addressing the problems which we are actually facing, like bringing down the cost of drugs so that when you go to buy that essential drug, you don't have to pay $1,000, or by focusing on preventive care, which we have been omitting for such a long time. And again, I would like to pitch in UBI here. If people have that $12,000, that foundation, they'll be able to take care of themselves. I'm in favor of universal healthcare, but I do think that swiftly reshaping 18% of the economy is a bad idea. It should be done gradually. The public option is going to be better than the private option.
Oh, yes, it's a yes, it's a yes.
And Vice President Biden.
This, from me, is going to have to be a yes. I have long held that access to healthcare is not a privilege, it's a right. Wealth of nations, the purpose of society, the purpose of a government is to guarantee security for its people. I believe that it is our responsibility, our imperative as public servants to guarantee quality and quantity of life for all of our constituents. Now, some people might know that I am not on board with some of my other friends on the aisle for Medicare for All. I stand for revamping the Affordable Care Act, which Barack and I fought so hard to get passed. I abide by the principles in it. I think we need to double down, focus on the negotiations that we already had, and not strip away all that hard work to start over. Going into the economics of which gets brought up, yes, revamping the Affordable Care Act will cost $750 billion over 10 years, and that's a large number to provide health care. But Medicare for All is looking at a price tag of over $30 trillion for the same time. That's approaching the entire national debt for this nation. We do need to provide care, but we do need to look at it reasonably and rationally, and that's what I'm looking to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask my first question of Mayor Buttigieg. Mayor Buttigieg, the resolution at hand is not asking whether or not we value healthcare necessarily, but asking whether or not the government should be committed to actually providing every single citizen. I would imagine that means whether they want it or not. So since your plan seems to suggest that it's healthcare for those who want it, what about the citizens who say that they don't want the government to provide them their healthcare? Why should the government be committed to providing them healthcare as well?
I think that when you talk about social determinants of health, they are applied to everyone. So these are services that have positive externalities. So if you are living in a neighborhood, for example, that has really poor air quality, does not have trees outside, does not have a suitable environment for human habitation, that hurts everyone in the environment. So even if someone wants to, for some strange reason, live in a very polluted place, cleaning up these areas, just as a metaphor, helps everyone at the same time. But I think that I agree, we do have to have some choice, which is why I'm saying that if you want a public option, it would be there for you. But I would not force you to take that public option, because I trust the American people to make the right choice and to take this public option if it is right for them, when it is right for them. If we try to revamp the system all at the same time, it's 18% of the US economy. There's 1.8 million jobs that would be swept away with public healthcare. And so we would need to do this a lot more slowly.
Okay, Senator Sanders, you talk about cutting out special interests and kind of refinancing healthcare. So what does that mean in terms of going forward? What would you like healthcare to look like in the United States?
I think we have a perfectly well-working system right now in the form of Medicare, which applies to people 65 and up. And if you ask anybody who is on Medicare, they'll tell you that the healthcare is generally pretty good. They don't have to deal with the huge amount of bureaucracy that is generated when you go through the private health insurance system. I don't think anybody here, at least I know personally, has ever had a good experience with a private health insurance company, because they're not designed to maximize your health or well-being. They're designed to maximize profit. And that, at the end of the day, is the fundamental problem that we are coming up against. There are those whose interests lie with profit, and there are those whose interests lie with the increasing of quality and quantity of life for the American people. That's why it's so cynical when you have people like Mr. Buttigieg come up here and tell you that we need to be focusing on the health of all Americans. If that were really true, you would focus on the solutions that, through study after study, have been shown to, 1, reduce cost by over $6 trillion, and 2, improve health outcomes completely. We have to stand with the movement that actually gets it done, and that is the Bernie Sanders movement.
Mr. Yang, you discussed how 77% of small towns don't have access to healthcare. So what is your plan to provide access in these rural areas?
So one of the biggest problems we are facing is we don't have enough doctors. There's a simple reason for that. The cost of going to medical school is insanely high. So as your leader, I'll make sure that we have a loan repayment program, and we eventually make the cost of medical school much lower so that we have more doctors who can actually work in these places which don't really have good healthcare. Secondly, we have 3 million nurse practitioners who are perfectly eligible to give you primary care, but they're banned to do so by law. So I'll remove that absurd law so that, again, we'll have 3 million more people in the workforce. One thing I would like to briefly mention, it's a false accusation that I'm being funded by private companies. No, I'm not. The Yang Gang is a grassroots movement, just like the Sanders campaign. And I will, the government should, under my leadership, will decrease the influence of private lobbyists because healthcare is a human right.
My question is for President Trump. My question is, really? The McDonald's thing? I understand that your suggestion is that it's about personal responsibility and that's the reason why we are having these sort of hikes. But even so, are there not other programs like public schools that we have decided that the government is also responsible for? Why is the healthcare system any different than something like education, which we've collectively decided that the government should be committed to providing for every citizen?
Well, look at public school systems. A lot of our public school systems are failing. A lot of our public school systems should be privatized and should be brought into that 21st century type of mentality where we privatize them. And that way you have competitiveness for who can get a better education. But with public schools and going over to healthcare is, should everyone have ability to get healthcare? We do have that ability now. People are able to get healthcare if they want to get it. I think we should privatize healthcare because the question isn't just focused on insurance companies. It's focused on the quality of the healthcare, which also talks about doctors. And I want to know, under Bernie's type of mentality, how is it going to affect the doctors? If you privatize it, it's going to allow those people who took out those massive loans to sit here and go through medical school to pay it back. That's why our doctors make such high money. And as long as we keep privatizing it, we will continue to see a growth in our medical department. And we are the largest funding country when it comes to medical research. If it wasn't for us, the entire world would not have the medicine that they have today, because the majority of it, 98% of it, comes from us. Thank you.
Vice President Biden, I was curious how Wealth of Nations overlaps with this issue. So are you kind of suggesting that this is going to be taken care of by some invisible force, or how is the government going to directly address this issue?
Perhaps I did not frame that little illusion properly. The question, as I understand it, is what the government should do, normative. What is our job as civil servants to do for our people? I chose this as an example because the point of society, the point of governments, as I understand it, through study, through talk, through discussion, we exist here in office to help people, to guarantee security, stability to the people that are our constituents. I reference this not necessarily for the economic portion, not the invisible hand that sets markets, but the purpose of the government behind it, the system, the framework, exists to guarantee the stability, to guarantee safety. Perhaps it's not the best example, but I believe it fits for determining the purpose, what it's our job to do. Thank you.
Senator Warren, you discussed converting to a Medicare for all, but in that plan, there are perhaps economic cutbacks with loss of jobs and taxes. So how would you account for that in your plan?
So when talking about allowing for this kinds of a plan, of course, it's going to take some time, and it's going to require us to end up having to tax those wealthy corporations, because that's where a lot of that money is going to come from. I really kind of want to address kind of what everybody's been saying on the stage. We've talked a lot kind of about choice and about how healthcare is something like the determinants is something that we need to be involved with. But I say, why can't we have a Medicare for all and look at those health determinants? We're already doing that in public health, and we can do both at the same time. Allowing people to have healthcare is like the fundamental basis of all of this. And of course, it's going to take some time. We're going to have to reinvent a system that's been preying on people for years and years and years, and people are going broke. So we really need to figure out a way to change this system for the better, because we need to give our citizens a chance to live. And by privatizing insurance, by not changing the system, it makes it hard for people to even live. So.
Thank you. Due to the time constraints, as usual, the environment is going to get screwed. So we're going to actually skip over our fourth resolution, and we're going to move to our closing statements. So if you'd like to just to address and discuss the environment, you're welcome to do so in your closing statements. But we're going to move to our closing statements. So each one of our candidates will have 1 minute to discuss what their closing statement is and wrap up their entire argument and respond to each other if they need to. And again, we'll do that in random order. After which, Aaron's going to come up and tell you how the voting system works. So make sure, folks, that you are taking notes on what everyone says so that you can vote on who the winner of tonight's debate will be. And our first speaker for closing statements will be Vice President Joseph Biden.
As part of closing remarks, I have to touch on the environment. I simply can't leave it alone. It is our imperative, as I stated before with healthcare, to take care of our people. This is a threat on a domestic, on an international. It crosses social and class lines. We can't ignore it, and we have to act. And that has been the message I feel for all of my stances on these resolutions. It's our job as public servants to help, to guarantee safety, to guarantee life. We protect the economy. We protect the middle class. We protect the health of our people. It is our job to see this great nation, these great United States, to flourish and to grow. That is all I want. That is all Barack and I ever wanted. That is why I want to be your next president, because that is all I'm committed to do. All I want, what keeps me up at night, is thinking, how do we perpetuate and how do we improve the American dream? Thank you.
And for those of you who are playing the drinking game at home, that's 1 Barack for the final one.
Next up, we have Mr. Yang.
So what keeps me up at night is the threat of AI, which nobody is talking about. But I would like to say, oh yes, before my closing statement, I would like to say, if you're wondering what Yang is doing here, we believe that even though he's not a candidate anymore, ideas still survive. He's going to be there doing something. And yeah, now Yang. So during the last election cycle, I think many of us were asking the question, what got Trump elected? And when you look at the numbers, you see that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, and Pennsylvania. All the swing states that Donald Trump needed to win. The fact is that we are going through the greatest technological and economic transition in human history. Economists say that in the next 12 years, 1/3 of Americans won't have a job. So the way to address these problems is by giving every American over the age of 18 a freedom dividend of $1,000 a month, paid for by the biggest winners of the economy, companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, etc. This money would empower our communities by making us mentally healthier, stronger, and less stressed out. And not just that, it would remind us that every human being has intrinsic value. It would be a testimony of justice to all those single mothers working day in and day out, to all those volunteers working for just causes, and historically underprivileged people of color. So.
Now we're going to move on to President Trump.
Okay. I would like to start with my closing statement to at least address the economy, because I at least want to put this yes block up once tonight. Because actually, to surprise most people, the U.S. actually does want to work with other countries. And we have. The United States has joined the 1 Million Tree Initiative, and just alone as of February 13th this year, we actually decreased our emissions the most percentile-wise of all countries across the world. So, and I would also like to say that we are recognizing that we need to find another solution. Oil isn't always going to be there. It will run out someday. So we should give the money to scientists and have them find more economical ways to power this great nation. And I would like to now go over to my foreign policy and where I was talking about the nuclear weapons. We don't want to ever use these nuclear weapons. I want to get that stated. We heard the no strike first policy. The reason why we believe that we should continue to have them is so we never have to use them. We want to keep that in the people's minds. Thank you.
Senator Elizabeth Warren.
All right. So today you've seen a lot of candidates, and of course, a lot of the people in this room can't relate to billionaires, relate to people who are of this high political advantage. And that's why, if you've seen kind of through what I've been saying tonight, is that my plan is to work for the American people and to take money out of politics and to allow people to have the opportunities to succeed, knowing that their candidates that they vote for aren't funded by large corporations, that we're working for you and not for someone else. And then, so the environment doesn't get fucked any worse than it already is, I'd like to talk about one of my plans that I have to fight one of the biggest fights that we're experiencing right now, the fight against climate change. None of the policies that we talk about here will matter if we don't address this issue. I propose a $2 trillion investment in researching, developing, and manufacturing clean energy and technology here in America so that we can lead the global effort to slash greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and beyond. If we don't address these fundamental issues of climate change, we won't be able to do anything that we've proposed up here. We won't be able to tackle the issues with nuclear weapons or corporate tax cuts. Nothing matters if the whole planet's on fire. And that's all I have to say about that.
Senator Bernie Sanders.
Awesome. So if you can't tell, throughout the night, I've been particularly loud, particularly angry, some would say, particularly animated. And there's a reason for that. It's because personally, like at my core belief, I think that if there are issues, if there are times to be angry and things to be angry about, those issues and that time is now. We are standing on a precipice, not only in terms of ecological collapse, but in terms of financial collapse. Right now, we as a generation are doing better off less than our parents, and our parents are doing worse off than their parents before them. And it is in understanding that there is a reason for that there is a reason why so many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. There is a reason why the environment is currently collapsing. There's a reason why none of us can seem to afford healthcare. It's because those at the very top will continue to protect their interests until we at the bottom decide to take a stand and do something about it. It's until we actually recognize that we might be different people and we might come from different backgrounds, but as young people, as students and workers, our interests are the same. And the interests that we have together are best represented and best defended by the Bernie Sanders movement, the movement that's gotten the most donations from any campaign in history. If there isn't a time, is now. If there is a movement, it is ours. So I ask you to join the Bernie Sanders campaign. The Tucson for Bernie group meets every Tuesday at Borderlands. The Students for Bernie group meets every Friday, and Social Sciences 114 at 5. You know, it's real shit.
And last, we're going to go to Mayor Pete.
I agree with Senator Warren. The environment gets screwed enough, so I'm going to give it its time. I think you'll get the same answer from most Democrats on this stage. We need to work in conjunction with our allies and even our adversaries to face the shared enemy of human-caused climate change. And that's because we recognize not only the severity, but the causality of the problem. The research is very clear. More than 90% of the changes we are seeing in our climate are due to human emissions of CO2. The fact that our current president is willfully ignorant on this issue is indicative of his administration and adds to the laundry list of reasons that he is not worthy of the office. Australia's Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was, and somehow still is, a climate change denier. Australia burns as a consequence, and I ask you not to make the same mistake.
Thank you very much, Mayor Buttigieg. Thank you to all of our candidates. And now, Nia Fife, you guys can stand up and take a bow after we declare the winner. Nia Fife and Marnie Giroff are going to come up and tell you how the voting system works. And while you vote, Aaron Fowler is going to come up and tell you about our future events and a few other things. But please.
Okay, hi everybody. So basically we printed out QR codes. They should all be on your table. And then if you use them, it'll lead you to the voting site and it has all the candidates' names on it. Just choose who you thought won. Thank you. If you need any help, let us know. If you need to know which candidates.
Yeah, we'll send them around to the aisles to give us a help.
If you can't use the QR code, there's all of the links. If you don't know how to do the QR code, just use your camera, and if you put your camera over it, it'll send out the link at the top.
If you're struggling with the voting system, just put your hand up and Marnie will come around if you're struggling. All right. If you're struggling with the voting system, just kind of put your hand up and Marnie will come around and help you. All right, everyone's good? Okay. At this time, we'd like to give a special thank you to Dane Velasquez, the gentleman who videotapes all of our events for free so generously. We'd like to say thank you to the U of A President's Office for their support during the Regents Cup and moving forward. Woo! We want to say thank you to the University of Arizona's Provost Office, as well as thank you to JoJo and the marketing team. Lexi and the events team. And Griffin, who is doing voters registration, so please go see her afterwards to get registered to vote, as well as all the interns who helped manage these awesome campaigns. So thank you. We also hope to see you at the gun rights debate, which is going to be the 26th, and it's that gun rights are, pardon? 24th. And gun rights are critical to a free society, correct? Okay. And then there's also going to be a marijuana debate on April 21st. So, all right, do we have the votes in? Has everyone voted? Good? Yes? Right.
Should we do the raffle?
Yeah. Sure. Raffle, yay. Did I just say the number?
2, right?
2 Starbucks gift cards going to. Do I just say the last digit?
Just say the whole thing.
865301. Woo! And then 865313. Yay! Okay, cool. All right. Just the winning?
No, the whole.
Whole shebang? Should I go bottom up?
Yeah, come on up.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Yeah? All right. Getting 2% of the vote, Mr. Donald Trump. Yep. Up next, getting 5% of the vote is Joe Biden. Next, with 7% of the vote is Pete Buttigieg. With 17% of the vote, Andrew Yang. With 19% of the vote, Elizabeth Warren. Leaving a whopping 50% of the vote to Bernie Sanders.
If anybody would like to come and argue with the candidates, you're welcome to come and rush the stage as soon as
I would stay here.
And if anybody has any questions on how to contact us.
And we'd also like to let Vincent say one quick announcement about himself.
Hey guys, if you've been to a couple of our events, I'm doing a shameless tag, unlike Bernie over here. March 3rd and 4th, ASUA is having elections. I'm running for the executive vice president. So if you are a student, please get the word out. I am running. I would love to talk to you on Instagram about my campaign at Vincent Paulapendo. Give me a little tag. So I would really appreciate your vote. If you want to talk to me about stuff, yeah, I'm available. So thank you.
Please go see Griffin if you want to register. And thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. Please come to our other events and come talk to us if you'd like to.